Some people believe humiliation disappears the moment the room grows quiet. They are always wrong. The first thing anyone noticed that afternoon was the sound of polished scissors opening beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Romano estate. Crystal glasses sparkled across a ballroom prepared for a wedding that promised elegance, wealth, and perfect appearances. Yet every smile froze when Victoria Sinclair, the fiancée of one of New York's most respected businessmen, lifted her hand and pointed directly at the young housemaid standing beside a silver serving cart. Naomi Carter lowered her eyes the way she always did, her simple black uniform pressed neatly, her natural curls carefully pinned back after nearly an hour of preparing the reception hall. She had learned long ago that invisible people survived longer in places built for powerful names. Victoria admired her reflection in a towering antique mirror before speaking with effortless confidence. "That hair doesn't belong in my wedding photos." A nervous laugh escaped one guest before several others joined in, eager to please the future lady of the estate. Naomi's fingers tightened around the linen napkin she carried, though her expression remained calm. She had been cleaning the mansion for only 10 weeks, and every paycheck helped cover the mortgage on the small Ohio home, where her late mother's memories still lived inside faded photographs and carefully folded quilts. Losing this job would mean losing far more than income. It would mean losing the last chance she had promised herself. Victoria extended a pair of expensive styling scissors toward the salon assistant hired for the bridal fitting. The young stylist hesitated, glancing from Naomi to the guests surrounding them, silently hoping someone would interrupt. Nobody did. The musicians quietly lowered their instruments. Even the servers stopped moving. "Cut it," Victoria repeated with a pleasant smile that somehow felt colder than the marble beneath everyone's feet. "She's part of the staff. Staff should look presentable." Naomi slowly removed the small ribbon that held part of her curls in place. She neither argued nor begged. She simply closed her eyes for a brief moment, remembering her mother's gentle voice years earlier brushing those same curls before church every Sunday morning. "Your hair reminds you where you came from," her mother had always whispered. "Wear it with gratitude." The first lock drifted softly onto the polished floor. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable looks, while others pretended nothing unusual was happening. Victoria thanked the stylist as though she had completed an ordinary task and turned back toward her bridal gown without another glance at Naomi. The maid knelt quietly to gather the fallen curls herself before anyone else could step on them. As she reached for the final strand, her trembling hand paused beside a small cedar keepsake box she had carried to work every day without anyone noticing. She carefully placed the curls inside and closed the lid with extraordinary care, as though protecting something far more valuable than hair. No one asked why. No one wondered what the box meant. Hidden high above the ballroom, a security camera continued recording every second in perfect silence, capturing not only what was done, but every face that chose to watch without speaking. Naomi waited until the ballroom emptied before she carried the silver trays back toward the service hallway, moving with the same quiet precision that had earned the trust of every employee except one. Not a single complaint escaped her lips. She carefully wiped the corners of her eyes before anyone could mistake tears for weakness, then placed the small cedar box inside her locker as gently as someone setting down a family heirloom. Inside rested the freshly cut curls beside a faded photograph of a smiling woman whose hands had once braided that same hair every Sunday morning before sunrise. The edges of the picture had softened after years of being unfolded and refolded, but the words written across the back remained perfectly clear. "Never let this world decide who you are." Naomi traced the handwriting with her fingertip before closing the lid again. Outside the staff room, whispers floated through the corridor. Some employees felt sorry for her. Others admitted they had wanted to speak, but feared losing their own jobs. No one blamed the stylist. Everyone understood that refusing the future lady of the estate could end a career before dinner. Naomi understood that too, which was why she quietly returned to polishing glassware as though nothing had happened. She believed dignity sometimes sounded like silence instead of revenge. Upstairs, Victoria laughed with her bridal consultants while discussing imported flowers, custom linens, and the perfect seating arrangement for 500 distinguished guests. She dismissed the afternoon as a minor inconvenience already forgotten, convinced that appearances always mattered more than feelings. Every compliment about her expensive gown strengthened that belief. She never noticed that several guests who had laughed earlier were now unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact whenever the conversation drifted toward kindness or character. Even wealth could not erase the uncomfortable memory of watching someone humiliated without reason. Near the grand staircase, 8-year-old Ethan Romano sat alone with a sketchbook balanced across his knees. He had slipped into the ballroom after everyone left and discovered a single curl resting beneath a chair where no one else had looked. Instead of throwing it away, he carefully placed it inside the cedar box before returning it to the hallway outside the staff quarters. His grandmother had once told him that precious things were not always expensive, and for reasons he could not explain, that forgotten curl felt precious. He never mentioned what he had seen because children often noticed truths adults preferred to ignore. As evening settled over the estate, the security office completed its routine archive of the day's recordings. Hundreds of hours of ordinary footage transferred automatically onto protected servers without anyone reviewing them. Cameras had captured deliveries, decorators, musicians arriving, guests entering through the front gate, and one silent moment inside the ballroom that looked insignificant beside every other event. The technician clicked save, shut down his monitor, and headed home without realizing that one ordinary recording would soon become the most important file inside the Romano estate. Meanwhile, Naomi finished her shift, picked up the cedar box, and paused briefly beneath the portrait of the estate's founder before walking toward the employee exit. She whispered the same promise she had repeated every day since her mother's passing. They may change how I look, but they will never change who I choose to become. The following morning, the Romano estate awakened beneath a sky the color of polished silver, and every employee returned to work as though yesterday belonged to another lifetime. Naomi arrived before sunrise carrying her lunch in a small canvas bag, greeting the kitchen staff with the same gentle smile that had never depended upon the length of her hair. Her curls now rested just above her shoulders, uneven in places despite the careful effort of the stylist. Yet she moved through the mansion with quiet confidence that puzzled everyone who expected humiliation to leave permanent scars. Mrs. Alvarez, the head housekeeper, watched Naomi fold fresh towels with remarkable precision and finally asked if she wanted the day off. Naomi thanked her kindly but declined. Bills did not pause for broken hearts, and promises did not disappear because someone had chosen cruelty. Upstairs, final wedding preparations accelerated as florists delivered hundreds of white roses, designers adjusted imported fabrics, and event planners hurried through endless checklists. Victoria inspected every room with relentless attention, searching for flaws that only she could see. When she spotted Naomi arranging fresh flowers in the breakfast room, an amused smile crossed her face. She walked toward the maid with several bridesmaids following behind her, each carrying shopping bags from luxury boutiques along Fifth Avenue. The conversation stopped the moment Victoria entered the room. She slowly circled Naomi before speaking loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Much better. Now you finally look like someone who understands her place." A few uneasy laughs echoed from the bridesmaids, though none sounded convincing. Naomi simply continued trimming flower stems and placing them into crystal vases with steady hands. Her silence irritated Victoria far more than tears ever could. She expected gratitude, embarrassment, or at least an apology for making the previous afternoon uncomfortable. Instead, she found quiet composure. "You should thank me," Victoria continued. "Sometimes people need someone else to improve them." Naomi gently placed the final white rose into its vase before looking up with calm eyes. "I always appreciate opportunities to grow, ma'am." The answer carried neither sarcasm nor resentment, only quiet dignity. For a brief moment, Victoria seemed uncertain how to respond. Then she dismissed the exchange with a careless wave and walked away, convinced she had won. None of the women following her noticed Ethan standing behind the partially open library door. He had heard every word while searching for a history book his tutor had assigned. His young face tightened with confusion because his grandmother had taught him that kindness always sounded stronger than pride. Later that afternoon, he quietly carried the cedar box into the private study reserved for his uncle Dominic Romano. The room smelled of leather-bound books and cedar shelves polished over decades. Ethan placed the box carefully beside a stack of business documents, believing his uncle should return something that belonged to the maid. He did not open the lid. He simply left it where it could not be missed. Outside the estate, a black luxury sedan rolled through the front gates after nearly 2 weeks away on business. Dominic had arrived home earlier than anyone expected, carrying only a travel bag and a schedule already filled with meetings. He had no idea that before the sun set, one small cedar box waiting quietly on his desk would ask a question that money, influence, and power could never answer. Dominic Romano rarely entered his private study before greeting the staff, but exhaustion from 2 weeks of nonstop negotiations led him directly upstairs with little more than a quiet nod to the employees who stepped aside. The mansion felt unusually different, although he could not immediately explain why. Every polished surface reflected perfection. Every arrangement appeared exactly as scheduled, yet something beneath the carefully maintained elegance seemed strangely unsettled. He loosened his tie, placed his leather portfolio upon the desk, and noticed the small cedar box resting beside several contracts awaiting his signature. Dominic paused. He did not recognize it. Nothing entered his study without permission, and every member of his household understood that rule. Curious rather than annoyed, he lifted the lightweight box into his hands. The wood carried faint scratches from years of careful use, the corners softened by countless moments of quiet handling. It was not expensive. It was loved. He slowly opened the lid. Inside rested a neatly folded photograph, a faded ribbon, and several dark curls arranged with extraordinary care. For several silent seconds, he simply stared. The contents made no sense beside billion-dollar agreements and polished executive reports. He turned over the photograph and quietly read the handwritten message preserved on the back. Never let this world decide who you are. The words were simple, yet they lingered longer than any business proposal waiting on his desk. Dominic studied the smiling woman in the picture beside a much younger Naomi, whose bright curls framed a face untouched by grief or responsibility. He had seen that same young woman serving coffee, organizing guest rooms, and greeting elderly employees with patient kindness since she joined the estate. She never complained. She never sought attention. She simply worked with quiet excellence. Looking again at the uneven curls inside the box, he realized something obvious. Her hair had been much longer only days before he left the city. Someone had changed that. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. Ethan stepped into the study carrying a history book against his chest. Dominic looked up with a faint smile that appeared only around family. "Did you leave this here?" Ethan nodded carefully. "It belongs to Miss Naomi." Dominic motioned for him to continue. The boy hesitated before answering. "She did not lose it. I thought you should see it." Dominic recognized the unusual seriousness in the child's voice. Ethan rarely involved himself in adult matters unless something truly troubled him. "Why would I need to see it?" Dominic asked softly. Ethan looked toward the open box before quietly replying. "Because everyone watched, and nobody helped." The room became perfectly still. Dominic did not ask another question immediately. Children often describe difficult moments with remarkable honesty because they had not yet learned to disguise uncomfortable truths. He closed the cedar box with deliberate care and rested one hand upon its lid. His attention shifted toward the security monitor mounted discreetly across the room, connected to every camera throughout the estate. Somewhere inside that endless archive waited the explanation for the sadness hidden behind Naomi's calm smile and the quiet conviction inside Ethan's voice. Dominic reached for the secure remote on his desk, entered his personal access code, and selected the recordings from the ballroom on the afternoon before his return. As the loading screen illuminated the dark wood shelves surrounding him, the study fell into complete silence except for the faint hum of the monitor, and for the first time since returning home, Dominic felt that whatever he was about to witness would change far more than a wedding plan. The recording began without sound for the first few seconds, showing only the graceful movement of guests entering the ballroom beneath sparkling chandeliers. Dominic leaned forward in his chair as the security footage continued, watching familiar faces exchange polite smiles before the atmosphere slowly shifted into something far less elegant. He recognized Victoria immediately, confidently greeting designers and wedding planners before her attention settled upon Naomi, who stood quietly beside a serving cart waiting for instructions. Dominic pressed pause for only a moment when he noticed the expression on Naomi's face. She looked neither frightened nor angry. She simply appeared determined to remain respectful regardless of what happened next. He resumed the recording. Every second that followed unfolded with painful clarity. Victoria accepted the scissors with effortless confidence, gestured toward Naomi, and spoke words that the camera could not capture, but whose meaning became unmistakable through every reaction surrounding them. Dominic watched the stylist hesitate. He watched several guests laugh nervously. He watched employees lower their eyes instead of intervening. Then he watched Naomi remove the ribbon from her hair with steady hands before quietly accepting the humiliation without raising her voice even once. The first lock of hair drifted toward the marble floor like a silent promise breaking apart. Dominic never looked away. When the recording reached the moment, Naomi carefully gathered each fallen curl and placed them inside the cedar box. He stopped the video once more. His office remained completely silent. He had negotiated with ruthless competitors, survived public scandals, and managed crises capable of destroying multinational companies. Yet the quiet dignity displayed by one young maid unsettled him more than any business conflict he had ever faced. He replayed the final minutes again, this time studying the faces instead of the actions. Some guests smiled to impress Victoria. Others stood frozen by uncertainty. Not one person stepped forward. That realization disturbed him almost as much as the humiliation itself. He closed the recording and immediately opened the employee attendance records. Naomi Carter had never received a disciplinary notice, never arrived late, never filed a complaint, and had been praised repeatedly by supervisors for professionalism and compassion toward both staff and visitors. Her record reflected quiet excellence. Dominic slowly closed the file and rested both hands upon the desk. His grandfather had built the Romano family reputation upon one principle repeated throughout every generation. Respect every honest worker because character is never measured by a job title. Those words had been engraved inside the original family office decades earlier, and Dominic had repeated them often during speeches about leadership. Now he realized that principle had been violated inside his own home while he was away. A soft knock sounded at the study door before Mrs. Alvarez entered with the evening household report. She immediately sensed the unusual stillness inside the room. Dominic looked toward her with calm composure that concealed growing disappointment. "Where is Miss Carter now?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Alvarez explained that Naomi had already completed her shift and returned to the small apartment provided for several live-in employees near the estate gardens. She hesitated before adding that Naomi had refused every offer to leave work early because she did not want additional attention. Dominic nodded slowly, thanked her, and waited until the door closed again. His eyes returned to the cedar box resting beside the monitor. Tomorrow evening, the estate would host another formal gathering attended by influential guests, business partners, and close friends celebrating the upcoming wedding. For everyone else, it would be another elegant event. For Dominic Romano, it had quietly become the moment when truth would finally walk into the room. The following evening, the Romano estate shimmered beneath thousands of warm lights as luxury cars rolled through the front gates one after another, delivering politicians, executives, philanthropists, and longtime family friends who believed they had arrived for another celebration. Soft piano music floated through the ballroom, while servers moved gracefully between conversations, offering sparkling water and elegant hors d'oeuvres with practiced precision. Naomi worked quietly among them, carrying silver trays with the same calm professionalism she had shown every day since joining the household. Although her shorter curls still revealed the painful reminder of the previous afternoon, she refused to let discomfort define the way she served others. Several employees noticed Dominic enter the ballroom alone. Unlike previous events, he did not immediately greet influential guests or stand beside Victoria. Instead, his eyes slowly traveled across the room, observing every detail with thoughtful silence. Victoria finally approached wearing a brilliant white evening gown that attracted admiring smiles from nearly everyone around her. She slipped comfortably beside Dominic and assumed he had returned to continue planning their wedding after weeks of business travel. "Everything looks perfect," she said with unmistakable confidence. Dominic answered politely, but his attention remained elsewhere. "Appearances can be convincing," he replied, his calm voice revealing nothing more. Victoria laughed softly, believing he was complimenting the evening. Moments later, Dominic requested everyone's attention. Conversations faded naturally as guests gathered near the grand staircase, expecting a welcome speech before dinner. Victoria smiled proudly, certain he intended to honor their future together. Dominic stepped toward the large presentation screen, usually reserved for charity events and family celebrations. He held the small cedar box in one hand without explaining why. "Before we continue tonight," he began, "there is something every person in this room deserves to see." Curious whispers spread through the audience. Victoria's smile faded slightly as Dominic connected a secure drive to the ballroom display. The enormous screen illuminated, revealing the unmistakable image of the ballroom recorded only one day earlier. At first, many guests looked confused. Then recognition slowly appeared across familiar faces. The room became extraordinarily quiet as the recording unfolded exactly as it had happened. Every gesture, every nervous laugh, every silent witness returned without exaggeration or commentary. No dramatic music accompanied the images. No one interrupted the recording. The truth needed no decoration. Naomi stood near the back of the ballroom carrying an empty tray when she realized what everyone was watching. Her face reflected surprise rather than fear. She had never expected anyone to revisit that painful moment, much less in front of the very people who had witnessed it. Victoria's expression gradually changed from confusion to disbelief as she recognized herself accepting the scissors and directing attention toward Naomi. She glanced around the room searching for reassurance, but the approving smile she had enjoyed the previous day had disappeared. Guests who once laughed now lowered their eyes. Others folded their arms in uncomfortable silence. Even those who barely knew Naomi suddenly understood what they had failed to stop. When the recording reached the moment, Naomi carefully gathered each fallen curl and placed them inside the cedar box. Dominic quietly paused the screen. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone. He simply held the cedar box where every guest could see it before asking one calm question that echoed through the silent ballroom. "Can anyone tell me when dignity became something a person with power was allowed to take from someone without it?" No one answered Dominic's question. The silence stretching across the ballroom carried more weight than any excuse waiting to be spoken. Victoria forced a small laugh, hoping to dissolve the tension before it settled permanently over the evening. "Dominic, this is unnecessary," she said with practiced confidence. "It was only a simple adjustment. She works here, and I wanted the staff to look polished for the wedding." Her words echoed through the room, but they found no agreement. Dominic looked at her for a long moment before setting the cedar box gently upon the table beside him. His expression remained calm, almost disappointingly calm, yet everyone who knew him recognized that his quiet voice usually arrived before his most important decisions. "A polished appearance has never required the humiliation of another human being," he replied. Victoria folded her arms, refusing to retreat. "You are turning something insignificant into a public spectacle." Dominic slowly shook his head. "No, the spectacle already happened. Everyone in this room watched it. Tonight they are only seeing it honestly." Several guests lowered their eyes, recognizing themselves on the screen only moments earlier. Some of the bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably, realizing that nervous laughter had become silent participation. Dominic stepped away from the screen and walked toward Naomi, who still stood near the back of the ballroom, holding an empty silver tray. Every conversation had disappeared. Even the musicians remained perfectly still. Dominic stopped several feet from Naomi, ensuring she never felt cornered or placed on display again. He spoke with the same respect he would have offered any honored guest. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology." Naomi looked genuinely surprised. "Sir, you do not owe me anything," Dominic answered without hesitation. "Everything that happens under this roof reflects the standards of this home. I was absent, but responsibility was not. I failed to protect the dignity every employee deserves the moment they walk through these doors." His words settled deeply over everyone present because they carried neither anger nor performance. They carried accountability. Dominic then turned back toward Victoria. "Character is revealed by how we treat people who cannot advance our careers, increase our wealth, or strengthen our reputation. Yesterday, your choices revealed yours." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." Dominic reached into his jacket pocket and quietly removed the engagement ring box he had carried since returning from his business trip. He placed it gently beside the cedar box, not dramatically, but with unmistakable finality. A collective breath swept across the ballroom. "I am completely serious," he said. "I cannot build a marriage upon values that stand against everything my family has spent generations defending." Victoria's confidence dissolved into stunned silence as she looked around the room for support. None came. Not from the guests. Not from the planners. Not even from the friends who had followed her through every wedding appointment. Dominic continued in the same steady tone. "This engagement ends tonight, not because of one moment, but because that moment revealed a belief that another person's dignity could be treated as decoration. I cannot accept that belief beside me or within this family." The room remained motionless. No applause followed. No celebration emerged. Only the unmistakable feeling that everyone present had just witnessed justice delivered without humiliation, anger, or revenge, but with a quiet certainty that no amount of wealth could ever purchase integrity. The ballroom remained silent long after Victoria slowly turned and walked toward the front entrance, leaving behind the carefully planned celebration she had believed would secure her future. No one followed her. The heavy doors closed softly, yet the sound echoed through the estate as though an entire chapter had ended with a single quiet movement. Dominic stood motionless for another moment before addressing the guests once more. "Tonight was never about embarrassment," he said calmly. "It was about responsibility. If we ignore injustice because it is inconvenient, then we become part of it." Several people nodded almost instinctively. Others looked down, remembering their own silence during the incident. Dominic did not ask for explanations. He did not demand apologies. He simply allowed everyone to confront the truth in their own conscience. Then he turned toward Naomi once again. "Miss Carter, if you are comfortable accepting, I would like to ask something of you." Naomi set the silver tray onto a nearby table and answered respectfully. "Yes, sir." Dominic picked up the cedar box with both hands and walked the remaining steps until he stood before her. Instead of handing it over immediately, he spoke quietly enough that the room leaned forward to hear every word. "Your mother taught you never to let the world decide who you are. After watching what happened, I believe she also taught you something many of us forgot." Naomi lowered her eyes for a brief moment before replying. "She always said that dignity is not something another person gives you. It is something you refuse to surrender." Dominic smiled for the first time that evening. It was a small smile, but one filled with genuine respect rather than sympathy. He carefully returned the cedar box to her hands. "Thank you for reminding this household of that lesson." Mrs. Alvarez quietly stepped forward and placed one reassuring hand on Naomi's shoulder. Several employees followed, offering warm smiles instead of pity. The atmosphere inside the ballroom slowly changed. Earlier, the room had been filled with uncomfortable silence. Now it carried quiet understanding. Even guests who had never spoken to Naomi before approached her one at a time, offering sincere apologies for failing to act when it mattered. Naomi accepted every apology with grace, never seeking to make anyone feel smaller in return. Ethan walked over carrying a neatly folded cream-colored silk scarf from the family collection. "I thought this would look nice," he said shyly. Naomi accepted the gift with grateful eyes and gently draped it across her shoulders, not to hide what had happened, but to honor the kindness behind the gesture. Dominic watched the exchange before turning toward the estate manager. "Beginning tomorrow, every member of this household, including executives, family, contractors, and guests attending private events, will follow a written code of respect. Every employee will receive the same dignity regardless of title or position. Those standards will not be optional." The manager nodded immediately, understanding the instruction would become permanent policy. As conversations slowly resumed, the atmosphere no longer centered upon wealth, influence, or the canceled engagement. Instead, people spoke quietly about character, responsibility, and the surprising courage of someone who had never raised her voice. Standing near the ballroom windows, Naomi looked out across the peaceful gardens where the evening breeze gently moved the trees beneath the stars. She touched the cedar box once more and realized that although a painful memory would always remain inside it, so would something stronger. Proof that kindness could survive humiliation, and that true respect, once awakened, could change an entire house without a single act of revenge. 3 months later, the Romano estate looked much the same from the outside, with its towering gates, manicured gardens, and elegant stone walls welcoming visitors from across the country. Yet everyone who entered immediately sensed that something important had changed. The new code of respect framed inside the entrance hall had become more than a written policy. It had become the culture of the household. Every employee, from executive assistants to kitchen staff, was greeted by name. Every new contractor received the same introduction on the first day. Courtesy was no longer treated as a favor. It had become the standard. Naomi Carter continued her work with the same quiet grace that had always defined her character. Her hair had begun to grow again, the soft curls slowly returning week by week, but she no longer measured healing by her reflection. She measured it by the peace she carried into every room she entered. The cedar box remained safely inside her locker, although she opened it less often now. It no longer represented only a painful memory. It reminded her that dignity could survive even the moments designed to destroy it. One bright Saturday morning, Dominic walked through the gardens before an annual charity luncheon hosted at the estate. Volunteers arranged tables while children from local community programs laughed across the lawn. Near the fountain, he noticed Naomi helping a young girl who seemed embarrassed about her own tightly curled hair after hearing unkind comments at school. Naomi knelt beside her with the same gentle patience her mother had once shown her. "Never let someone else's opinion become the mirror you look into," she said softly. "The people who deserve your kindness will always see your heart before they see your appearance." The little girl's worried expression slowly became a smile. Dominic watched from a respectful distance without interrupting. In that quiet moment, he understood that real leadership was not measured by authority, but by the ability to protect another person's dignity. When the luncheon began, Dominic welcomed the guests with a brief speech. He spoke about service, responsibility, and the importance of building communities where every individual was treated with equal respect. He never mentioned the painful events that had changed the estate. He did not need to. The people standing beside him had already become the living proof of those lessons. Before the ceremony concluded, Dominic invited every employee to stand alongside the family for the annual photograph, something that had never happened before. There were no separate rows based on titles, no hidden corners for the staff, only one group sharing the same frame beneath the summer sky. Naomi stood near the center holding the cream-colored silk scarf Ethan had given her months earlier, while the young boy proudly smiled beside her. As the camera captured the moment, Dominic quietly looked across the gathering and realized that the strongest foundation any family could ever build was not wealth, influence, or reputation. It was character. The photograph would eventually hang inside the entrance hall where every visitor could see it, reminding generations to come that respect was not reserved for the powerful. It belonged equally to every honest person who walked through those doors. And on that day, everyone present remembered what true dignity looked like.